Engagers, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of using games and gamification in our daily lives, for example, to learn what we are teaching. And I am Rob Alvarez. I work at Ironhack, teach at IE Business School University, and so much more, and host this podcast. If you have an extra second, please go ahead and subscribe for free to our email list at professorgame.com/subscribe. And Engagers, welcome back to another episode of the Professor Game podcast. And we are with Erin today. But Erin, before we take off, we need to know, are you prepared to engage?
Oh, I am already highly engaged.
Let's do this. And we have Dr. Erin Baker today because we are going to be talking about their experience as a self-leadership coach, business strategist, social psychologist, internal family systems practitioner, and author of Joyful AF, the essential business strategy we're afraid to put first. And they are on a mission to help heart-centered entrepreneurs and small business owners to create prosperous, difference-making, joyful AF businesses and lives that light them up. Erin holds a PhD in psychology from University of Texas, Austin, and was formerly in leadership roles at Facebook and Microsoft, and are known for their infectious energy, unapologetic authenticity, inclusive wit, and unflinching commitment to their clients' joy. So, Erin, are we missing anything from that intro you want to mention?
No, that felt like a mouthful. And it's every time I hear it read back, I go, oh, I did that? Right.
Amazing. So,
yeah,
Erin, we always like to know what our guests are into. Like, what do their lives look like? What are they doing? What are they interested on these days? So, can you run us through a day, a week, whatever you want to go for?
Yeah. So we were just talking before recording about it being a day of multiple things going on. So I run my own business. It's a coaching business, and so any given day, I could be doing anything from coaching clients. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs and small business owners to writing content on social media platforms. I do a lot of social media marketing. I just finished a book, so I've spent a lot of time in the last few years writing Joyful AF and doing a lot of learning and studying and always trying to hone my craft. I'm really interested in, as a psychologist, the human mind and how can we get to understand it better, and how can we understand how to make this thing we call life a more joyful experience, I guess, is for lack of a better word. So I'm doing all kinds of different things in that realm, and then always trying to find time to play in the day, whether it's in the work I'm doing or playing outside. I have a basketball hoop and I live in a really great neighborhood for walks where I can kind of frolic in wildflowers.
Sounds great. Sounds absolutely great. So, Erin, we're always, getting started with this kind of question. And it's all about one of those times when you were trying to do something, it didn't go well, what you would maybe call your favorite fail or first attempt in learning. We want to be there with you, take that experience as well, take it home. And maybe, of course, if you want to share how you got out of it, how you iterated out of it, or whatever that looked like.
Yeah. Failure is pretty much par for the course in running a business. And what keeps coming back to me is my whole journey in starting my business. I left the Facebook, Microsoft corporate leadership ladder to start a business, had no clue what I was doing. And turns out most people in business don't know what they're doing either. But there was nothing in my pedigree that said, oh, yeah, this person has an entrepreneurial bone in their body. And I, got off running and I found myself, looking for joy in my business. And that's kind of one of the main reasons I decided to start a business, and found myself 9-10 months into the business just miserable. And it's because I had translated all of the ways that I thought, say, Facebook or Microsoft were imposing their will on me and shackling me. I was doing that to myself and getting wrapped up in, how am I supposed to do this very serious business thing? And looking around at other people and seeing, well, what does a good entrepreneur look like? What are the, 5-step formulas to doing this thing? And I was
Good and
working to
serious one, right?
right. And I was working hustle and grind culture. I got to prove my worth as an entrepreneur, and I've got to be working all the time. And there were a million different things I could be doing. And about 10 months in, like I said, I was successful, but miserable. And that became the place where I started to look at, wait a sec, I wanted to have joy in my business. What does that look like? And that's around the same time I started to discover the power of games in my business. That's one form of play. And it's now I can't even count how many years I am in business. 4 years in business now. And I've been playing and following joy for the last few years. And it's been one of those processes of I lose the joy, find my way back, lose the joy, find my way back. But now I know how to recognize when it's happening, and I know how to playfully get myself back there.
Huh, amazing. And I guess you're kind of doing that already in a way. But if you were to start this process all over again, right? You were in that, first year, that first 6 months, or that first month. What would you do differently? Like, how would you start in a different fashion to make it more joyful, or make it better for you?
Well, I think the first thing would be to have recognized that it's not easy to just put joy first. We live in a society that wants us to be, very linear, very serious, very logical. And, we hear this word joy, or we hear things like play, but that was something that was in our childhood. And now we are serious adults. So if I would have even had an inkling at the beginning that, oh, I can't just say that I want to have joy in my business and it magically appears, that I needed to actually find ways to deliberately infuse that into my day-to-day life. So I would have been much earlier on asking myself, what is a way to play in my business? How can I make this more fun? Taking the pressure off. And one of the things I love about games, it's at least the ones I've created and played, is they take pressure off of the outcome. I don't ever play a game that has a win that I need to win. I mean, it's great if I do. But the process and the joy along the way that allows me to get into sort of a curiosity mindset and a creative mindset, that just right there shifts everything. And that's what I would have intentionally done every day is, how can I play? How can I get creative? How can I get curious? How can I turn this thing that I don't want to do or I'm scared of into fun?
Sounds amazing. It sounds like a good way to approach things now. And talking about, games and joyfulness, would you run us through again another story, but this time of something that actually went well using these strategies? Like, we want to be there with you. We want to know what that looks like and maybe some of the success factors.
Yeah. I have multiple examples that just went through my head. So I'll share maybe two. One, I want to give you, since this is a show about games, a very specific one, which is at one point early on in my business, I did not create this game. My former mentor, Rich Litvin, created this game. It's called the 90-Day Money Game. And I played this 90-Day Money Game. And the idea is that you set some pretty high target of revenue that you want to bring in during that 90-day period. And then what you really want to track is all the things that lead up to that money coming in, because a lot of people in business will focus on that, how much money is in the bank, but that's sort of a lagging thing from all the other activities you did to create that revenue. So I was at an event and Rich was the one leading the event, and he got me on the microphone and said, Erin, how much money do you want to make in the next 90 days? And someone previously had answered something that he wasn't satisfied with. And I had written down a ridiculously high number. It made no sense given where I was in my business, but I didn't think he was going to call on me. So I wrote down this number, and I'm pretty open with it in my book. So I wrote down $100,000, and I had not made half that. And I was really early in my business at this time. So I wrote down that $100,000. And then he asked me, what could you do or offer somebody that a single client would pay you $100,000? And what was beautiful about that question, I didn't actually offer anyone, I'm still to this day never offered a single person a $100,000 coaching package, but it got me thinking about what are all the ways that I am, thinking about, this is what I do, this is what I charge, these are my different offers. And it had me start getting creative about, well, maybe I could offer a group program, or maybe I could offer some workshops, or maybe I can reach out to this company who is looking for some leadership coaching. And I didn't hit the $100,000. I think I made something like 66,000, but I made way more in that 90 days than I would have had I not chosen to play the game of joyfully
Not too
creating.
bad at all.
Not too bad at all. I was very pleased with it. So I consider that a success. The other one that comes to mind is just the process of writing my book. I spent 2 years writing Joyful AF, and it was not Joyful AF when I started. It was a completely different book. And about this time last year, I decided I was fed up. I wasn't writing the book. I wanted to put it down. And thank God I had some people who said, you know what, just don't let it go. You can shelf it for now, but it'll come back. It took another few months of iterations of I kept hitting a wall with, what am I writing? What's the structure of this book? Losing the joy over and over again until I struck on the most joyful way for me to write my book was to pretend like I was having a podcast interview. And really. And so what I did is I recorded into Otter AI, my phone, my entire first draft of my book. And it turned out that not only did that help me get over all the blocks I was having around writing, but people now reading the book are telling me how much they love the fact that it feels like a conversation that they're having with me.
I like that one very much. So actually, let's double click there. Like,
yep.
What did that, like, you said you did it as an interview, as a podcast. What does that mean? Like, were you doing as if you were being interviewed? Were you just chatting up what you were thinking? Like, how did that go?
Kind of a mixture. So before writing the book, I had hosted my own podcast, and I ended up not being able to multitask. So I had to put the podcast on pause. But so I thought about, what are the kinds of conversations that I'm having with people on my podcast and what kind of questions are coming up. But then I also thought about, how do I normally record a solo episode? And that was sort of the impetus for thinking about, okay, let me speak into my phone as if there's an audience out there listening.
Interesting.
And I recorded in bite-sized pieces. Some pieces were 5 minutes long. The longest one was maybe 20, which then ended up being maybe 3,000 words. But these little sound bites really felt like I was, imagining an audience that was either asking me questions or I was just, giving a monologue to.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then double clicking back into the first story, actually, you mentioned that, you set up a goal, and that's super important to have the goal of where you're going in your game. What does the game look like? Like, can you give us a little bit more of details how that, like, not, of course, we don't necessarily need like, what are the clients that you got and all of that? Like,
oh yeah.
What was the structure? Like, why is that a game? Because if you just say like that, it sounds like, I set some goals, and that's like very typical business stuff.
Yeah. So part of the game was thinking about what are the metrics that you need to track along the way. So for me in a coaching business, the sort of client funnel starts with way back in I meet somebody, maybe it's over the internet or in person. I have a connection with them. I have a conversation with them that has nothing to do with coaching, but at some point I might invite them to a coaching conversation. From that, I might have a certain number of people who have a coaching conversation with me who then want to work with me. And so I make a proposal. So those are some basic metrics. So I had to work out some numbers there around, how many people would I have to have that initial connection with to get to the certain number of clients I had. So there was some gamification of, well, how can I go meet people and finding, these interesting places to go, whether this was before the pandemic. So whether it was in town or conferences, and then what are the creative ways to invite people who don't know what this thing called coaching is into a coaching conversation. So there were little games there. And then when it came to the numbers in my head, I realized I couldn't just offer one-on-one coaching packages. So the game was, how many different ideas could I come up with, and then seeing which ones landed. And so it was, there's not like a And for me, one of the things that made it a game is I have a whiteboard wall and I had like a rainbow road that I would fill in with different colors when the money came in. I'd fill in little pots of gold when I made proposals. I'd draw other things when I made fun proposals. So it felt like I was moving a piece along a game board as I filled up my revenue, coffers, and as I filled my client practice.
Amazing. So engagers, as you can see sometimes, and we've mentioned this before, a game is not necessarily a 3D video game. It can be, if it's a video game, it can be 2D. It can be very simple. It can be text-based. It can be non-digital. So it can be a board. And it can be even lower in tech in that sense, in the sense that you can have a board where you draw your things, you imagine, what your game is going to be about, and you start keeping score of what you're doing, where you're getting to, like what's your journey, right? So I love the simplification sometimes that we are able to reach when we really know what we want to achieve, right? So the use of games and gamification in general is not about what technology you're using or not using. It's about how you are, either yourself or your clients or your students or whomever you're targeting. How are you pushing this user into achieving their own goals, right? So students' goals are learning, or at least in theory, right? Your goal was to, achieve that financial success. A client might want to reach, for example, I work at Ironhack, and maybe one of the people that go into the webpage, they want to, break into the tech world, and they're not a techie at all. So you're helping them reach that goal, or yourself in this case, right? And that's what the game is about, right?
Yes, that is what the game is about. And I will say there's one really important piece for me around games, which is when you turn something into a game, something you might be scared to do becomes fun. So a great example with that 90-day money game, I offered a single coaching package for way more money than I ever thought was reasonable, because it was a game to see if I could do it. And the person said yes.
Ooh.
And another game I've had clients do in the past is networking bingo. And the idea is most of us hate networking. We hate cocktails. We don't know what to cocktail party. We don't know what to say. We don't know what to do. It's very awkward. So the idea is to create a bingo card for yourself and have things like, see if I can get someone to tell me a funny story about themselves, or, count the number of awkward people I meet. You can make up anything you want, but you can have this little bingo card, and you can have it in your phone. You can have it in your back pocket. You can just have it in your mind. But the idea is to create all these little things you want to collect at the networking event. And then all of a sudden the pressure is off from the conversation, because it's more important to get your bingo than it is to be not awkward.
and an interesting thing, I don't know if it's the case of what you were mentioning, is when that is the setting, and it's a setting for everyone, everybody's pressure goes down. So there's less awkwardness, and people are like more willing to do that. And they don't feel like, oh, this person, like you're in a networking event and you approach somebody and you try to talk. And sometimes it feels like they're looking at you like, but why are you talking to me? It's like, well, because that's what this is about, right? Talking to other people. But when you do that, you actually set the expectation very clearly of what is supposed to happen here. You're supposed to go out and look for people with this characteristic or this, or like, oh, who has a birthday in the same month that you have, like stupid things in that sense that might not be relevant for what you're doing, but that get you to achieve that goal of talking to more and more people. So there you go. You have an objective and you reach it through different game mechanics, strategies, and ideas.
Yeah, it's my favorite way to move through. Is something I don't want to do or something I'm afraid of, I'll turn it into a game.
There you go. So Erin, I'm assuming that at this point, after all these years of experience that you've had with this and your joyful business and so on, when you're approaching a problem or a client's problem and you want to use perhaps a game or some joyful strategy, you probably have a way of doing things. Let's call it a way, other than it could be a process, a series of steps. What does that look like? Let's say a client brings you a problem today and you want to solve it through a joyful strategy. What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I will say is finding out what's not joyful about the problem solving they're doing right now. There's a whole lot to joy, but a joyful strategy is one that comes back to, in my line of work at least, connecting with who you are, what lights you up, what your strengths or geniuses are, how your brain works, and how you like to do things. So if somebody has a particular goal in mind, the thing about business is there's as many ways to run a business as there are people on this planet. So we'll come back to, well, okay, of the options out there that we've seen, what feels joyful to you? What feels like it's aligned with what's important to you, what you value? How does it make you feel? Does it make you come alive wanting to do it? How can we create a strategy that works for how your brain works? I have a lot of people who come to me these days who are neurodiverse in some way. A lot of people, it seems to be a lot of people in the entrepreneurial world have some form of ADHD. And so we have to really work with, well, how does their brain work? So the process is really coming back to exploring who this person is. And then I like to come back to, from that place, then, okay, how can we curiously and creatively and courageously move forward? I think curiosity, creativity, courage, and self-connection are sort of the foundational elements of joy. And from that place, we, come up with all kinds of potential solutions, and we experiment. I'm a scientist at heart. And so we say, okay, let's set up an experiment. Let's go down this path and see what happens. And if it goes well, great, we'll keep going. If not, let's try another path. Let's go collect data. And sometimes collecting data requires us to make a game, and sometimes it doesn't. It just depends on sort of what's up for that client. And some clients are really receptive to games, and some just, for whatever reason, would rather not.
We are serious people. We
Yes.
don't do games here.
Well, they like to play, but for some people, actually, the idea of putting a game together, some people are like, great, they'll go off and create the game and come back to me and say, this is what I'm playing. Other people will say, wow, that feels really overwhelming to have to come up with some sort of, concrete thing. How can we just turn this idea, this mentality that we're playing a game, how can we turn what we're doing into that mentality rather than creating a specific set of, here's what we're doing and here are the rules.
Got it. All right. So that seems like a process. And in your case, it is an application, so to speak, of doing something for a specific single person, and that helps us refocus on the importance. I would argue, of really understanding who we're designing for. In your case, it's it's beyond crucially important, because if you just gave them a generic solution that works for everybody, it's probably not going to work for a single one of your clients, right?
Correct. Yes.
So there is where, understanding if it's one single person, that is amazing, because you can have a laser focus on that person. But even if it's not, even if it's a group of people, you can still cater for what seems to be the personalities, the interest. What are the things that get them going, this group of people that you're targeting, or the single person? And then,
Absolutely.
all the creativity and all the ways of designing, creating, coming up with things. But then you go into a very important stage, which is testing it out and seeing how it works, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm a scientist by training, and I also spent, my days in Facebook and Microsoft. I was a user experience researcher and leader. So I'm all about, the design thinking process, which really works well for entrepreneurs. And you're absolutely right. I haven't had too many instances of a CEO or small business owner wanting to take games to their team, but the same thing absolutely applies. It's okay. Now, how do you talk about the personality or culture of the team? And how do you bring in everybody and their own interest to play something that's fun towards a goal? Yeah.
Absolutely. So thank you very much for that, Erin. Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification. And Erin, when you're, creating all these things with all the experience that you've had, there must have been some things that sort of jump out and say, oh, this is the kind of thing that I always have to think about, or best practices. Not silver bullets, but, something that you would say that, when you're using games, when you're using joyful strategies, think of this or use this, and your project is probably going to be at least a lot better.
Yeah. So I would say the best practice I have is keep checking in with yourself as to how joyful is this game, this strategy. What happens all the time is we think something is going to be joyful or fun, or we think something's going to work, and then it doesn't. And then sort of our or doesn't feel good, it's not fun, it's not as playful as we think. And then the easy thing for our brains to do is say, well, clearly following joy doesn't work. That's not true. We can't always think our way into what's going to be fun, right? You can imagine if you go out to a restaurant and you look at something on the menu and you think you're going to like it, and then you know what? Oh, wait, I don't like that food. And so a best practice really being checking in on joy constantly and being really willing to pivot as your joy demands.
Especially, and that's, I think, part of the scientist mindset that you were mentioning before. It's be willing to be wrong, and that's fine. Like you go at it and say, well, let's try this and see what happens. If it doesn't go right, it doesn't mean I'm dumb. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person or anything. It just means I have to try something else.
Yeah, and it's okay for what brings you joy to change too. It's okay that it was joyful for a moment and now it's not.
Exactly. So things might change. You might be at a different stage. Your clients might be at a different stage as well. So think about those things as well. And keeping up, like, this was kind of a great recommendation. Is there, thinking about these questions about the topics of the podcast, I don't know if you had the chance to listen to other interviews, but is there somebody that you would think like, oh, I would really like to listen to the perspectives or the insights of this person, sort of a future guest for Professor Game?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that. And what comes to mind, and I don't know if he does podcasts at all, but Rich Litvin, who taught me the 90-day money game, has a lot of really innovative ways of stretching people's thinking using different types of games. So he may or may not be doing interviews these days, but he'd be someone that, if he is, would be very interesting.
Amazing. I'll have to catch back with you with the spelling of that name so that we can try to catch up with him. Or if you can make an introduction, that would be even better, so that it's a little bit closer to having him on the show. So, Erin, is there, of course, right next to your book, Joyful AF, is there a book that you recommend, to sit in our libraries right next to yours for the engagers that they would definitely profit from?
I had a really hard time with this question because I just absolutely love books and I read so many of them. What I'm going to go with today is what just keeps popping out on my shelf right now in bright yellow, is a book called The Long Game by Dory Clark. And, she's using the long game, not an actual game, but I think one of the things that we as humans really struggle with is staying in things for a long time. And I actually do think what we're talking about in terms of games can really help that. But I love her book for how do you think about, being in something for a really long haul, especially if it's 5 or 10 years. And she has very concrete strategies you can implement for being able to stick with things when it gets bumpy, really is how I like to think of it.
It's funny you're saying that, and it's something that's been sort of popping back into my mind. The way at least my brain is built is, in a way, it's a little bit on the opposite direction. I am that kind of person who might stick to something for maybe too long, just because I said, I'm going to stick with this, and I do it.
There's sunk cost fallacy.
And so sort of people around me like say like, wow, but how do you do it? And it's like, how do you not do it?
Right.
Sometimes it's about how do you just say, this is done, you drop it and you move on. I like to play, like, for example, like a game I'm enjoying a lot in my phone is Clash of Clans, right? So I started during the pandemic, and of course I enjoyed a lot, and that helps, to keep on playing it. But it's not the kind of thing that you say, I already done enough, and I just want to drop it. It's like, no, I'm getting better. My base is growing up, and I'm getting to the maximum level or whatever. For me, it's like more of a thing like, oh, I've invested so much in this, I actually want to continue there in games and many other things. So it's interesting that you mentioned exactly that one, because it's something that's been going on in my mind for quite a while.
It's a delicate balance. I talk about this a lot with joy. It's really good to know that this thing we do called life or business is a long game, and how to be in it for the long haul. But it's also really good to know when you're in the sunk cost fallacy and when it's time to cut loose and do something different. And it's a very, very delicate balance, and most of us don't get it right.
That's it for sure.
Yep.
And talking about, balance and all these strategies that what would you say is your superpower? That thing that you do great in this joyful or and joyful business and games and all this stuff.
Yeah. My biggest superpower has nothing to do with games, but when I'm working with clients, I have the ability to really sit and listen deeply in a way that most people have not been heard. And I'm able to really be there in a non-judging way. So a lot of my clients end up sharing really deep, personal, vulnerable stuff because it turns out your humanity shows up in your business no matter how much you want to shut it out. And so I have a really, great ability to be with people in all of their celebration and all of their wins and all of their messiness. And what most of my clients really point out is how much I remember about that. So if I've worked with someone for 2 years, for instance, I have a couple clients that are that long term. I'll say, "Oh, you remember that thing from 2 years ago that you said?" And they'll go, "Wait, what?" You remember that? I think it comes from my days being a scientist and a data collection person. I collect data, I find patterns. I'm just always able to recall things, and so that I think contributes to my clients feeling deeply seen and heard because they're not used to people remembering tiny details from 2 years ago.
Absolutely. So that is definitely a superpower. And
It is.
even if it's not over the super long term, when you're trying to figure something out, when you're trying to design something and understand the person that you're designing for, it's super important because you actually remember what people were talking about and you're able to extract those insights from that conversation or those conversations, right?
Yes, absolutely. And oftentimes it's stuff that's underneath that I can, they are not saying, but I can see that that's what they're trying to say. And that's sort of like design thinking, right? You're
Yeah.
trying to anticipate what's the real problem we're solving.
Amazing. Amazing. So, Erin, we come to a difficult question, at least for most of our guests, which is, what is your favorite game?
Yeah, this was a difficult question for me because, first of all, what I started with was, well, how do you define game? Because there's so many different ways to think about it. So I'm going to tell you what my favorite game is right now. I would never call myself a big gamer, so I'm not playing. I haven't had any game consoles for years, but every morning my wife and I play the spelling bee from the New York Times. And if your listeners are unfamiliar with the spelling bee, it's basically there's a center letter and there's 6 letters around in a sort of a honeycomb, and you have to make as many words as you can find using the center letter. And some days there's 20 words, some days there's 50 words, and it's a challenge. It makes us learn new words because sometimes it'll have some obscure archaic reference to something, and it's a really great way for my wife and I to wake up and connect with each other.
Sounds absolutely amazing. I've never played that game. It sounds like something to reference for sure.
Yes, it's a lot of fun.
So, Erin, thank you so much for all these insights, all this knowledge, all of this experience that you've shared. But before we take off, we would like to know if you have any final words, any final piece of advice, and of course, where can we find out more about you, about your book, about the work that you're doing in general?
Yeah, totally. So the final word I will say is my tagline on my website. It came from a conversation with a friend. There's a common phrase: chase excellence and success will chase you. And I have changed that to chase joy and success will chase you. And that is true whether you run a business, whether you are in any kind of career. It's true for life. And I'll say success could be whatever you want it to be. But I really, really believe the more you can come back to play and fun and connection to who you are and how you tick in the world, the more you will create whatever it is you're looking to create in the world. And in terms of finding me, you can find me on my website. So it's erinmbaker.com. Turns out there's other Erin Bakers out there. So erinmbaker.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Dr. Erin M. Baker. And you can find my book on Amazon. It's, again, Joyful AF, the essential business strategy we're afraid to put first. You might have to do a little searching because I spelled joyful a little differently and it's intentional. But I've been hearing just from the people who've been reading it so far that yes, it's written for a business audience, but it's a handbook on joy that everybody needs right now. So I would love to have people check it out.
Amazing. Thank you so much once again for investing this time, for being with us today, Erin. However, as you might know, and the engagers already know as well, for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Engagers, it's fantastic to have you around, and thank you for listening to the Professor Game podcast. And if you want more interviews like the fantastic guest Erin Baker that we just had, or any of the other ones that we had in the past, please support us and go to professorgame.com/subscribe and get started on our email list for free. There's no cost to this. Supporting us is for free in that sense. And that way we will be in contact. You'll be the first to know of any opportunities that Professor Game might have for you. And remember, before you go on to your next mission, remember to hit that button. Hit that button of subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.